be careful for those who are not paying attention. We're about to go into what's called the Wile E. Coyote moment. Everybody's running along and says, oh, don't worry, the Fed's got my back. The economy is fine. I love this guy Biden, and America's the greatest, and the economy is safe. And when people crash, when this thing crashes, and it's coming soon, it's the people that are not prepared. The people who are not watching this are the ones you're going to have to be afraid of. Be very, very afraid of those who are sound asleep at this moment, because when they wake up, they're going to wonder, what happened? I knew something was going wrong all these years. I didn't get the bigger picture of it. So this is the emergency broadcast. Janet Yellen herself, the FDIC, and the Federal Reserve Bank will determine which banks survive and which ones die. Number 2 is, what does it mean when Japan and Mexico want to join the BRICS? And the BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and on and on and on. But if you have Japan and Mexico, who are possibly as close to us as Canada, joining the opposing side. So I'll just tell you a quick story. I went to flight school, to fly these things in Vietnam, and they wanted to prepare us for the worst. So how did they prepare you for the worst? Well, they make it the worst. So what they did is they take us out into the Gulf of Mexico, off of Pensacola Beach. They simulate a parachute crashing into the ocean, so it's freezing weather. I think the temperature was -3 degrees or something. We hang out the back, we drop into the water, we got to unhook, then we paddle ashore, our little rubber ducks, there's like 7 of us in a group, and we go ashore into the swamps of Florida, and our job is to survive. So it's a simulate crashing in Vietnam or the jungles, and then we had to figure out how to survive. So everything is like a little Boy Scout camp. The first day, everybody's happy, we're chugging along. This is easy. Day 2 gets a little bit more serious. Then day 3, we're hungry. And this is what I'm talking about. It took us till day 3 to turn into animals. We went primal. I was ready to kill the guy next to me. We're starving to death. We're hungry. These guys are chasing us with guns, blanks, of course. But we're running. I'm eating palmetto. Just ripping palms apart, trying to get a little piece of nourishment, starving to death. We finally shot a raccoon, and there was 7 men, 25-year-old men, and 1 little raccoon. And pretty soon we were growling. We were just like a bunch of wolves. And the side of me came out of me that terrified me. Is what happens when you go primal after day 3. What happens when your neighbor goes primal? Because they finally wake up and said, I should have listened to emergency number 1, emergency number 2, and emergency number 3. So I want to thank my friend Andy Schekman for keeping me informed personally about what's going on in the world. So really briefly, could you give us an overview? Number 1 was Janet Yellen, Secretary of Treasury, also Fed chairman at one time, saying that she, the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and the Federal Reserve Bank will determine which banks live or die. Why did that terrify you? That's number 1.
That terrified me and the people that I've been talking to over the last few weeks to a level that I've never seen before, and myself personally. Let's break it down. First of all, there's roughly 5,000 of these regional banks, and these banks, Robert, are responsible for roughly 70% of all the small business loans in the United States. And the small businesses have traditionally represented anywhere near 40% of GDP in this country. They are the backbone. These are the banks where you walk in and they say, hi, Robert, how's your family? How's your dad? How's your mom? How are your kids? Oh, I'll see you at the Little League game tonight. How's the new business going? And they make loans based upon relationships, not upon balance sheets and business plans. They are more of a piece of the community for all of Middle America. And the majority of all the small businesses in this country have relied upon these banks because of a relationship. And where a business plan and a balance sheet may not stack up so well with one of the big 5 or 6 commercial banks, it works with the small regional banks. And so what she said was, when being interviewed and in a House subcommittee inquiry, the gentleman, the representative from Oklahoma, said, Madam Secretary, I just want to make sure we're on the same page here. You just bailed out Signature Bank. and you just bailed out the depositors at Silicon Valley Bank. Now, if one of my constituents in Oklahoma who has $5 million in a regional bank goes bankrupt, if the bank goes bankrupt, will that depositor be bailed out and everyone else? All of the banks in Oklahoma. And she said, no, sir, they won't be. It will have to be determined by an uber majority, as she termed it, between the FOMC, which is the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, myself, and the president. So in essence, what she was saying is that they will be judge, jury, and executioner. But if you really look at what she's saying, she is basically saying that if you have money in any of the banks that are not systemically too big to fail, then you better get it out, because they will fail and you will be bailed in and you've been warned. The question then becomes, which banks are too big to fail? Which banks are systemic? And when you have a small business or your life savings in a place where you thought it was safe, you never speculated to begin with. What's going to happen? Are you going to risk that to chance? And so she's lit a fuse under literally 5,000 banks in this country that have been the cornerstone of the small businesses and of middle America, forcing everyone into a handful of very large commercial banks. And it's a very, very frightening situation for most of these people to have to come to grips with either staying with the relationships they have and hoping for the best while not really preparing for the worst, or yanking their money out and moving it into one of the large commercial banks, which she's telling us will not fail. We will backstop the too big to fail banks. And in essence, she's creating socialized banking, putting everyone into just a handful of very, very large banks.
The Communist Manifesto, centralized banking, that they control the whole economy. It's run by the academic elite, and you and I are screwed. So that's number one. Please understand that. Question is your money safe in a bank? Or is it going to be stolen by the banks, called a bail-in?
In the last 2 weeks, I have never experienced the level of anxiety and fear that I'm feeling right now. It's almost like a vat of butter poured over my head, and it's just coating me with people's anxiety. The level of fear and anxiety, and it's awful. I mean, people are terrified right now, and they don't know where to turn. Some are turning to precious metals, and others are turning to short-term government treasuries, and others are moving to the big banks. But the amount of money being yanked out of these regional banks, which is going to have a domino effect, is extraordinary.
You speak the language of the banks. And that's the most important thing right now. Do you speak the same language the banks are speaking? What's the significance of Japan and Mexico contemplating or already joining the BRICS?
So Mexico has formally applied. The rumor is Japan, Australia, and New Zealand are contemplating. If I had to sum it up, Robert, I guess I would say something to the extent that what it really symbolizes is that the United States and their actions have done more to destroy itself in the past few years than any external enemy could have ever done, because we weaponize our source of power, which is the US dollar. And we have driven most of the world away from it as a result. And the majority of the world's populations reside in the areas that comprise the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Belt Road Initiative, and the Eurasian Economic Union. This growing group of people that are rallying together against this type of hegemony, this type of, as you called it last time, bullying, and the perception of hypocrisy. And they are rallying away from the West. And really that's what it talks about, the ramifications of what really does that mean if we lose the Federal Reserve status. It's happening, and I guess today we would talk about what happens when it does happen.
We didn't go over this, but Triffin's dilemma and Gresham's laws and all this stuff. America has been violating all of these laws of money for all these years, and the world says we've had enough of this. So they're joining the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And what Andy's pointing out, that means 70% of the world's population that used to use the dollar are going to take this and say, we don't want it anymore. And so there's going to be quadrillions of dollars coming back. And the ramifications of that are possibly, and I hope it doesn't happen, but it's called hyperinflation, that this thing goes to trash. This becomes toilet paper, this little dollar here, because there's so much of it out there. And when 70% of the world's population says, we're not going to use this anymore, aloha, what does that mean to the world? Which brings up the Wile E. Coyote moment. I'm not worried about you guys who listen to 1, 2, and now 3. But what about the person who's fat, dumb, and happy and thinks, oh, don't worry, the Fed's got our back, the economy is the best, we'll be fine. You guys are just, you're Chicken Little, saying the sky is falling. It's not falling. It's going to be fine. What happens when your neighbor comes knocking on your door because their kids are starving? You think they're going to be wanting your food too and your money? And that's why I told the story of the U.S. Marine Corps and the U.S. Navy throwing us out in the woods. On day 3, we went primal. That little raccoon, I still remember it. There was 7 men, 25-year-old men. You know how much we can eat at 25. And this little raccoon was smaller than a chicken. And I could hear myself growling. I want that piece. You can't have that piece. You can't. And then there was another group of 7 men came. They said, you getting? No, leave us alone. So there was another group coming in and said, they were so desperate, this other group of 7, we sold them the bones. I still remember that. I said, that's a pretty good deal. We got $20 for these bones here. They were chewing away on it. The point is, we're only 3 days away from primal. And what happens when your neighbor comes to visit you because their kids are starving? Well, how far away are we from the Wile E. Coyote moment?
Right, and there have been a lot of things that are happening. Kenya saying to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates that we will buy your oil from now on with Kenyan shillings instead of US dollars, in and of itself is not as big of a deal. I talk about the game of Jenga where you pull pieces out and finally the whole thing tips over. But what was very interesting about what he said was this piece where in the first 30 seconds, more or less what he says is, let me give you all some advice who hold US dollars. The term he uses, you should go to the nurses. He said, in the next few weeks, this market will be very different. In essence, he's intimating that something, some event, whatever that event may be, is going to happen in the next few weeks that will affect the dollar, that those holding dollars should do what they need to do right now, he says, because in the next few weeks, this market will be very different. And I found it to be rather concerning on a broader sense. The central theme has been about the loss of the petro standard, the broken chorus of countries, starting with the Belt Road Initiative and ending with the BRICS nations and everything in between.
Wait. What Andy's saying is that in 1971, Nixon took this off the gold standard. They had to back it up with something. So 74, Nixon and his protege Kissinger, they went to Saudi Arabia, says, if you make this the petrodollar, so they went from a gold dollar to a petrodollar. And so they gave the dollar immense power throughout the world because everybody had to take this stuff here. And so what happened when China enters the scene and all this stuff is going on, what Andy's talking about, this is going to come back on us now.
You need to get out of dollars and you need to do it quickly. If you don't, the whole market is changing and you need to go see a nurse if not. And what he was basically saying is get out of dollars. And how it all affects this moment when the world snaps their fingers and no longer takes dollars for oil. The ramifications of that are extraordinary and will be very similar to what you spoke about at the beginning of this conversation. If the dollar collapses and all those dollars come flooding home and interest rates spike to the moon, everything in this country changes in the blink of an eye. Not only are the 3 pillars of wealth, stocks, bonds, and real estate, inversely correlated to a rise in interest rates, and we're not talking about a 25 or 50 basis point interest rate hike, and you can see just raising interest rates to 4.5% has already almost broke the entire world financial banking system. But I'm talking the world dumping dollars globally because they no longer need to hold it to own oil. The ramifications of that and hyperinflation as those dollars come flooding home, because as you mentioned, every country's had to own dollars since 74 in order to buy oil. It's created this synthetic demand. The ramifications of dollars being globally dumped simultaneously in favor of another settlement currency for oil, it's terrifying because everything that makes people feel wealthy in this country is inversely correlated to that moment. And when the dollar dies, along with stocks, bonds, and real estate, what does that mean in the analogy of 7 hungry Marines eating a raccoon? When the supply chains are completely broken, the dollar is worthless, the grocery stores are empty, people have no cash, they are ill-prepared for what is coming. So yes, they will come knocking. And as in my mind's eye, I guess I would say, when people have nothing to lose, they lose it. And that's the kind of environment that I would envision, God forbid, that we're not so really far away from when you look at the pieces that are being put into place. I'd like to mention one in particular, and it's really being overlooked, in my opinion, by the media, and I don't quite understand it. But in terms of what happened in Saudi Arabia, here you got Sunni and Shiite. They've been at each other's throats for centuries, and it is a reconciliation between the two countries brokered by China, and the two countries are now reestablishing diplomatic ties and opening embassies in each other's country.
And then also what happened was, when Biden went to Saudi Arabia, they didn't even talk to him. Because why would they talk to him? He's a woke guy. He says, we're going to put oil out of business. I'm going to talk to Biden. You know what I mean?
Right.
But when Xi goes in, the guy ahead of China, he gets a royal welcome because he's going to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. And it was Biden who cut down the Keystone XL pipeline that sent oil from $30 a barrel to $130 a barrel, which destroys the middle class because they can't afford, they got to choose between putting gas in the car or eating. And that's why I used the example of sitting there with this one little raccoon. And at least we had something. But when the other 7 guys came across and they were starving also, you have not lived and seen desperation like that. And I'm saying to all of you, if your kids are starving, what would you do?
Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is 60% of human population in and of itself, are pretty darn close to it. The Eurasian Economic Union and the BRICS, all of them together are north of 80% of human population who are not going green. And you add the other countries, 60 of them, including Mexico, and including perhaps Japan, and including perhaps Australia and New Zealand, those aren't even part of the 60, that are applying or have expressed interest into applying. You're dealing with the majority of human population. And what China is doing is around cooperation, upon reconciliation. They're going into countries like South America. They're going into Africa. They're going into the Arab states, and they are building infrastructure. They're building bridges. They're building roads. They're bringing ports. They're building oil refineries.
What Andy is saying is, I was in Zimbabwe. We fly helicopters out there to go hunting. And this guy says, that's a Chinese compound there. And there was like this college campus filled with Chinese people building infrastructure. They were putting in fiber optic cable for the country. The Chinese were. They're doing all the things that makes a country richer, but they're countries with resources. Do you know what I mean? With stuff that the Chinese want to use. So we send our cheap ass dollars, these things here. We buy their, gold, silver, oil, copper. We pay them with fake money. But the Chinese go there and actually make their economy stronger via infrastructure. And I've seen these large campuses of Chinese people. I'm going, holy mackerel, this is the last 10 years. So when you see it, you go, what the hell is the U.S. doing?
And they're coming in and they're industrializing these countries that in a mutually beneficial way, giving the hope of a middle class, the hope of a better life, and doing it the right way with cooperation instead of coercion. And look, this is the first time in arguably 5 centuries that you don't have a political leader from the West setting the global agenda here. This is Xi Jinping and Vladimir that are setting the global agenda by going into these countries and making life better for everyone and mending fences and reuniting countries that have hated each other forever under a common goal.
They're not stealing the country's wealth with fake money.
Right.
When they spell quantitative easing, that's called counterfeiting money. So
Right.
all the U.S. had to do was print this stuff, and you could steal a nation's wealth. You could go to the Congo and take out all the stuff, the diamonds, the oil. You could go to oil-producing countries, steal their wealth with fake money. And what Andy is saying, it's over.
The de-dollarization, the lack of demand for the dollar, is going to increase inflation exponentially. You are witnessing a 100-year change. And when the switch flips, all of these countries have joined together and they dump dollars globally. It will be a religious experience in this country. If you are not prepared, you're dead.
And that's what that guy from Kenya was saying. Better go to a hospital now. I'm a Marine. I've been in my own homes. I've had people break in Hawaii. And when people are desperate, desperate people do desperate things. We're getting there now. Let me say one more thing. There's a thing called Triffin's Dilemma. Triffin's Dilemma meant that for the U.S. to be the world's money reserve currency in 1944, they had to print extra of this. So the whole world had this in their banks all over the world. They have more of this stuff than any other product in history. This is toilet paper. And what that guy was saying from Kenya is when this stuff starts coming back in, it's just not how much they printed. It's how much they've had in storage, because they had to be able to buy oil in this stuff here. So what's going to come back is a tidal wave of this toilet paper upon America. And this little $35 coin here, I don't like to make predictions, but I'd rather have this than this here.